When people hear the Stoics speak about preparing for loss, they often misunderstand it. They imagine a cold human being, someone who has already buried their feelings before anything has happened. Marcus Aurelius was not trying to become stone. Seneca was not training himself to feel nothing. They were doing something far more subtle and far more human. They were learning how to love deeply without being destroyed by fate. This is where our journey begins. Imagine Marcus Aurelius at night, not as an emperor surrounded by power, but as a man alone with his thoughts. The empire is quiet. The candles burn low. Tomorrow could bring war, betrayal, illness, or the death of someone he loves. He knows this, he does not deny it, and yet he does not shut his heart. Instead, he opens his mind. He says to himself that everything he loves is on loan, not to devalue it but to honor it properly. When you know something is temporary, you stop abusing it with entitlement. You stop assuming it will always be there. You begin to see it clearly. This is the first and most difficult truth. Loss is not an interruption of life. It is part of the structure of life. The Stoics did not prepare for loss to escape pain. They prepared so that pain would not turn into bitterness. Marcus reminds himself that people die, relationships change, bodies weaken, fortunes disappear. This is not pessimism. This is realism, and realism is what allows warmth to survive reality. Illusions shatter people. Truth steadies them. Seneca speaks directly to this fear. He says that we suffer more in imagination than in reality. Long before the loss happens, the mind creates a catastrophe and then reacts emotionally as if it has already occurred. The Stoic response is not to suppress this imagination, but to discipline it. You imagine loss not to rehearse despair, but to rehearse dignity. You say to yourself that if this person were taken from you, you would grieve, yes, but you would not curse existence. You would not collapse into resentment. You would remember that love was given, not owed. Here is where many people become confused. They think preparing for loss means loving less. The Stoics argue the opposite. When you know that nothing is guaranteed, love becomes intentional. Marcus Aurelius says that you should love people as though you might lose them tomorrow, not with fear, but with presence. You listen more carefully. You forgive more quickly. You waste less time on petty conflicts. Coldness comes from taking things for granted. Warmth comes from knowing they are fragile. Think about a man who believes his time is unlimited. He delays kindness. He postpones honesty. He assumes tomorrow will fix what today neglects. Now think about a man who understands that tomorrow is uncertain. He speaks truth gently, but now. He embraces fully. He pays attention. Which one is colder? The one who denies loss or the one who accepts it? Marcus trained himself every morning to remember that he might encounter loss, insult, sickness, or death. But notice his tone. He does not say this to harden his heart. He says it to soften his expectations. Expectations are what make us cruel when reality does not obey us. When you expect permanence in a world designed around change, every loss feels like a personal injustice. When you accept change as natural, loss hurts, but it does not poison you. Seneca adds another layer. He warns against premature detachment. Some people, in fear of pain, begin mourning before the loss has occurred. They emotionally withdraw while the person is still alive, while the moment is still present. This is not Stoicism. This is cowardice disguised as wisdom. True Stoic preparation does not steal joy from the present. It protects the future without corrupting the now. To prepare for loss without becoming cold, you must separate two things that most people confuse: attachment and appreciation. Attachment says, I need this to remain whole. Appreciation says, I am grateful for this while it exists. Marcus practiced appreciation. He would remind himself that every conversation, every shared meal, every quiet moment could be the last. Not to depress himself, but to sharpen his gratitude. Cold people numb themselves to avoid pain. Stoic people awaken themselves to value. There is a quiet exercise hidden inside Stoic philosophy. When you hold someone you love, you silently remind yourself that they are human and therefore mortal. This sounds harsh until you understand its effect. It removes possession from love. You stop clinging, you stop controlling, you stop fearing every small change. Love becomes free rather than anxious, and free love is warm, not cold. Loss will come whether you prepare or not. This is the part Marcus never lets you forget. The question is not whether you will grieve. The question is whether grief will refine you or ruin you. Preparation is not armor against sadness. It is guidance for how sadness moves through you. Unprepared grief turns into rage, blame, and lifelong bitterness. Prepared grief turns into sorrow that eventually transforms into gratitude for having loved at all. In this way, Stoicism is not about emotional distance. It is about emotional clarity. You feel everything, but you are not owned by what you feel. You cry, but you do not curse the universe. You ache, but you do not shut your heart forever. Marcus writes to himself that what happens to all people cannot be called misfortune. It is the shared condition of being alive. So the first step in preparing for loss is not hardening yourself. It is educating your expectations. You stop demanding permanence from a temporary world. You stop asking life to guarantee what it never promised. And in doing so, something unexpected happens. You become gentler, not because you feel less, but because you understand more. This is how the Stoics prepare for loss without becoming cold. They stand close to the fire of love, fully aware that it can burn them, and they choose warmth over numbness. They accept pain as the price of being human, and gratitude as the reward for having lived honestly. And once you understand this, you are ready to go deeper. After Marcus Aurelius accepts that loss is woven into life, he turns to a harder discipline, training the mind not to confuse love with ownership. This is where most people break. We do not just love others, we secretly claim them. We say my partner, my child, my friend, and without realizing it, the word becomes a contract with fate. Seneca warns that this silent contract is the source of unbearable grief. When something we believe belongs to us is taken away, the pain doubles because we feel robbed, not simply saddened. Marcus teaches himself a quieter language. Instead of saying, "This person is mine," he reminds himself that this person has been entrusted to me for now. The difference seems small, but it changes everything. Ownership breeds fear. Stewardship breeds care. When you believe you own someone, every moment of absence feels threatening. When you understand they are entrusted to you, every moment of presence feels precious. Coldness grows out of fear. Warmth rose out of reverence. Seneca gives an image that is uncomfortable but powerful. He asks us to think of life as a journey where companions walk beside us for a time, then turn onto different paths. Some walk with us for years, some for moments. None are meant to walk forever. The tragedy, he says, is not that they leave, but that we pretend they never will. This pretending creates a false safety that shatters when reality arrives. The Stoic prepares by refusing this lie, not by refusing love. There is a deep psychological truth here. When people avoid thinking about loss, they do not become more loving, they become anxious. Anxiety makes the heart contract. It makes you cling, control, and fear change. The Stoic approach does the opposite. By calmly acknowledging that loss is possible, even inevitable, the mind relaxes its grip. Love can breathe. You stop suffocating relationships with the demand that they must last forever in the same form. Marcus Aurelius writes that everything is in a state of transformation. What you love today will not be the same tomorrow, even if it remains physically present. People age, personalities shift, circumstances change. Loss does not only come through death, it comes through change. When you resist this, you become rigid. When you accept it, you become adaptable. Cold people resist change. Wise people flow with it. Seneca also speaks about timing. He says grief is natural, but prolonged despair is a choice. This is not cruelty. It is responsibility. You are allowed to mourn, to cry, to feel the weight of absence. What you are not allowed to do, according to Stoic thought, is to build a permanent home inside your sorrow. Preparing for loss means knowing when to feel and when to release. It means you do not confuse honoring the dead with destroying the living. Here is where Stoicism becomes deeply humane. Marcus never commands himself not to feel pain. He commands himself not to add unnecessary suffering on top of pain. Pain says, I have lost someone. Suffering says, life is now meaningless. Pain says, this hurts. Suffering says, this should never have happened. The first is natural, the second is optional. Preparation removes the second without denying the first. Think of a tree in winter. It does not hate the cold. It does not cling desperately to its leaves. It lets them fall, not because it does not value them, but because it understands the season. When spring returns, the tree is still alive, still capable of beauty. This is how the Stoic heart survives loss. It sheds what must be shed without killing the roots. Marcus Aurelius constantly reminds himself that nature takes nothing personally. Death is not an insult. Change is not betrayal. When you internalize this, something remarkable happens. You stop interpreting loss as punishment. You stop asking, why me? You begin asking, how shall I carry this with dignity? And dignity in Stoic philosophy is never cold. It is calm, grounded, and quietly strong. The mistake many people make is believing that emotional distance is strength. Seneca calls this false strength. Real strength is the ability to feel deeply without drowning. It is the ability to stand in grief without turning bitter. This is why Stoic preparation is done before loss arrives, not to eliminate sorrow, but to prevent sorrow from corrupting the soul. So the second movement of this philosophy is clear. You love fully, but you do not possess. You grieve honestly, but you do not collapse. You accept impermanence, not as an enemy, but as the condition that gives love its intensity. And when you practice this, you do not become colder, you become steadier, and a steady heart can hold both love and loss without breaking. As the Stoic mind grows steadier, it begins to confront a deeper fear that hides beneath loss itself, the fear that without what we love, we will not know who we are. Marcus Aurelius sensed this danger clearly. He warned himself that if his sense of self depended on external people or conditions, then fate would always have power over his inner life. Preparing for loss, then, also meant preparing the soul to stand on its own, without becoming isolated or numb. This is where Stoicism is often misunderstood. Independence does not mean emotional exile. Marcus was not trying to become self-sufficient in a cold, mechanical way. He was trying to ensure that love enriched his life without becoming the sole foundation of his identity. When someone becomes your entire emotional ground, their loss does not just hurt, it collapses you. The Stoic trains himself so that grief shakes him but does not erase him. Seneca expands this idea with sharp clarity. He says that no one should build their happiness on ground that can be taken away overnight. This does not mean you avoid loving others. It means you cultivate an inner stability that remains even when circumstances change. Think of it as learning to stand upright even when the wind is strong. You may bend, you may tremble, but you do not uproot yourself. There is a quiet daily practice behind this strength. Marcus Aurelius constantly returns his attention to what lies within his control, his judgments, his values, his character. When these become the center of your life, loss no longer strips you of meaning. You still feel absence, but you do not feel erased. Coldness comes from emotional shutdown. Stoic resilience comes from inner alignment. Most people avoid this work because it feels lonely at first. To sit with yourself without leaning emotionally on others can feel uncomfortable, even frightening. But Marcus does not advocate isolation. He advocates readiness. He wants to be capable of being alone without being empty, so that when he is with others, he is present by choice, not by dependency. This distinction changes the texture of love. Dependency begs, presence offers. Seneca uses a powerful phrase when he speaks about grief. He says we should mourn in a way that honors reason. Reason here does not mean suppression, it means proportion. You allow sorrow its natural voice, but you do not let it scream endlessly and drown out all other truths. Preparing for loss teaches you how to keep proportion when emotion tries to overwhelm perspective. This is also where gratitude enters as a stabilizing force. Marcus reminds himself that it is better to have loved and lost than to have never loved at all. But he does not say this as a cliché, he treats it as a discipline. When loss arrives, the Stoic mind actively recalls what was given, not only what was taken. This remembrance softens grief without denying it. Coldness focuses only on absence. Wisdom holds memory alongside pain. There is a moment after loss that defines the future of a person. In that moment you choose whether sorrow will close you or deepen you. Seneca warns that many people let grief turn into a lifelong posture, a way of seeing the world as hostile and unfair. The Stoic chooses another path. He allows grief to pass through him like a storm, knowing that storms do not last forever unless you build your home inside them. Marcus Aurelius often writes as if he is speaking to his own future self, the self that will face loss one day. He reminds that self that nothing truly good can be destroyed, because what is good is rooted in virtue, not circumstance. People you love can be taken, moments can end. But the capacity to love, to act justly, to remain humane, cannot be stolen unless you surrender it. This is the heart of preparing for loss without becoming cold. You strengthen the inner life, so that love does not become a fragile crutch, and grief does not become a permanent wound. You learn to stand firmly within yourself while remaining open to others. And when loss finally comes, as it always does, it finds a heart that can ache without hardening and a soul that can bend without breaking. When the Stoics speak about preparing for loss, they also speak about time, not as something we own, but as something that flows through us without asking permission. Marcus Aurelius was deeply aware that every moment is already slipping away as it arrives. This awareness did not make him detached from life. It made him intensely awake to it. He trained himself to live in a way that would leave no emotional debts behind. Many people fear loss because they fear unfinished business, words never spoken, apologies delayed, love assumed instead of expressed. When loss arrives suddenly, these silences become unbearable. Marcus quietly prepares for this by living as if today might be the last complete chapter with the people around him, not dramatically, not obsessively, but honestly. Seneca reinforces this idea with urgency. He reminds us that life is not short, but we make it short by wasting it. We waste it through distraction, resentment, and emotional negligence. When you truly understand that loss can arrive at any time, you stop postponing what matters. You stop saving love for later. You stop assuming that time will always be available to repair what you ignore today. This is one of the warmest aspects of Stoic philosophy. Preparation for loss does not pull you away from life. It pushes you deeper into it. You become more attentive in conversations. You listen instead of waiting to speak. You choose kindness even when pride wants to win. Cold people delay warmth. Stoic people practice it immediately because they understand time's fragility. Marcus of 10 reminds himself to act in a way that he would not regret if this were his final encounter with someone. This does not mean perfection, it means sincerity. You speak truth without cruelty. You forgive without keeping score. You show affection without embarrassment. When loss eventually comes, grief is still painful, but it is not poisoned by guilt. You can say to yourself that while the time was short, it was real. Seneca also addresses the fear of being emotionally unprepared. He argues that people who live carelessly are the ones most devastated by loss, not because they loved more, but because they loved lazily. They assumed continuity. They treated presence as permanent. When reality breaks this illusion, the shock is unbearable. The Stoic softens this shock by refusing to live on emotional autopilot. There is a quiet courage in this way of living. It requires you to face discomfort now so that you are not shattered later. It requires you to say difficult things while there is still time. It requires you to repair relationships instead of waiting for the perfect moment. This courage is not loud. It does not announce itself. But it builds an inner peace that no loss can completely destroy. Marcus Aurelius also understood that preparing for loss means preparing for regret. He actively worked to reduce the gap between what he felt and what he expressed. This is why his writings feel so intimate. They are not abstract philosophy. They are reminders to live cleanly in the present so the past does not haunt the future. Loss hurts most when it reveals how absent we were while something was still with us. Stoic preparation is the antidote to this regret. By living fully now, you ensure that when something ends, it ends without unresolved weight. Sorrow remains, but bitterness has no place to attach itself. So this stage of preparation is about presence, not clingy. Not distancing, but showing up. Marcus and Seneca both understood that a life lived attentively is a life that can bear loss with grace. When you give people your best while they are here, loss does not make you cold. It makes you reflective, grateful, and quietly strong. As Stoic preparation deepens, it begins to change the way you relate to pain itself. Most people fear loss not only because of absence, but because they believe pain will destroy them. Marcus Aurelius did not deny this fear. He studied it. He observed how the mind reacts to pain and noticed something crucial. Pain becomes unbearable only when we tell ourselves we cannot survive it. Marcus reminds himself again and again that the mind has a choice in how it meets suffering. The event itself is outside our control. The interpretation is not. Loss says something has ended. The mind often adds a second wound by saying this should not have happened or I cannot live with this. Stoic training removes this second wound. It does not numb pain. It prevents pain from turning into despair. Seneca is even more direct. He says that grief is heavy, but resistance to grief is heavier. When you fight reality, you exhaust yourself. When you accept it, energy returns. Acceptance here does not mean approval, it means recognition. You stop arguing with what has already occurred. Coldness comes from emotional shutdown. Acceptance comes from emotional honesty. There is a powerful inner shift when you allow pain to exist without panic. You realize that pain has a rhythm. It rises, it peaks, it fades. The mind, however, tries to freeze pain in place by replaying the loss endlessly. Marcus trains himself to stay in the present moment, where pain is always more manageable than the imagined future without what was lost. This practice is subtle but life-changing. Instead of asking, "How will I live without this person?" the Stoic asks, "How shall I live today with this feeling?" Today is survivable. Tomorrow will be faced when it arrives. This keeps grief from becoming overwhelming. You grieve in portions that the soul can carry. Seneca also warns against performing grief for others or for yourself. Some people cling to sorrow because it becomes part of their identity. Letting go feels like betrayal. Seneca challenges this belief. He argues that honoring someone does not require permanent misery. Memory can exist without suffering. Love does not demand self-destruction. Marcus Aurelius reinforces this with his reflections on nature. Everything that comes into being passes away. This is not cruelty, it is order. When you align your expectations with this order, pain loses its shock. It still hurts, but it no longer feels unnatural or unjust. Coldness grows when people feel wronged by reality. Peace grows when people understand reality. Another crucial aspect of preparation is learning to speak gently to yourself in moments of pain. Marcus writes to himself as a friend, not as a judge. He does not say, "Be strong" or "Do not feel this." He says, "Endure and abstain," meaning endure what you cannot change and abstain from adding unnecessary suffering. This inner voice determines whether loss hardens or humbles you. Stoic philosophy does not rush grief, it gives it boundaries. You cry when tears come. You rest when exhaustion arrives, but you also remind yourself that you are still alive, still capable of meaning, still responsible for how you carry what has happened. Pain is not an excuse to abandon virtue, it is a test of it. By preparing for pain rather than fleeing from it, you discover something surprising. Pain does not make you smaller, it reveals depth. It shows you what truly matters. People who never prepare for loss are shattered by pain. People who prepare are shaped by it. This is Ho. The Stoic meets loss without becoming cold. He lets pain pass through him without letting it define him. He refuses to turn sorrow into bitterness. He understands that pain is part of loving, not a failure of it, and in this understanding, the heart remains open, even while it aches. At this stage of Stoic preparation, the focus turns outward again, toward how loss reshapes our relationship with other people who are still here. Marcus Aurelius understood that grief can quietly isolate a person, not because others leave, but because the grieving soul withdraws. The danger is subtle. Pain convinces you that no one else can understand you, and slowly warmth turns into distance. Preparing for loss means preparing to resist this isolation. Marcus reminds himself that human beings are made for one another. Even in sorrow, withdrawing completely is a form of self-harm. He does not deny the need for solitude, but he warns against building a permanent wall around pain. Loss tempts you to close your heart to avoid being hurt again. The Stoic sees this temptation clearly and refuses it, not out of bravery, but out of wisdom. Seneca speaks to this directly when he says that grief should be shared, not displayed. He believes that sorrow softens when it is spoken honestly and carried with dignity. When grief becomes a performance, it traps you in it. When it becomes a secret, it festers. The Stoic path is the middle way. You allow others to witness your pain without letting pain define your entire identity. This balance protects warmth. Coldness often emerges when someone decides, consciously or unconsciously, that caring is no longer worth the risk. The Stoic rejects this conclusion. Marcus would remind himself that avoiding future pain by avoiding future love is not safety, it is poverty. You may avoid loss, but you also avoid meaning. There is also a moral dimension here. Marcus believed that your response to loss affects not only you, but everyone around you. When grief turns into bitterness, it spreads. When it turns into humility, it heals. By remaining open, even wounded, you teach others that pain does not have to destroy character. This quiet example is one of the highest Stoic virtues. Seneca adds that kindness after loss is a form of courage. It is easier to retreat into yourself and excuse harshness as suffering. It is harder to remain gentle when you are hurting. Yet this gentleness is what prevents grief from reshaping you into someone you do not recognize. Loss should deepen your humanity, not erase it. Marcus often reflects on the idea that people who wrong or hurt us act out of ignorance. This insight becomes even more important after loss. Pain makes you sensitive. Small offenses feel larger. The Stoic prepares for this by reminding himself not to let sorrow excuse cruelty. You can be grieving and still be just. You can be wounded and still be kind. Another essential practice is remembering that life continues to ask something of you, even in grief. This is not punishment, it is grounding. Responsibility anchors you when emotions try to pull you apart. Marcus does not abandon his duties because of sorrow. He allows grief to exist alongside responsibility. This coexistence prevents collapse. Loss also reveals who we are when no one is watching. Seneca believed that character is tested most severely in misfortune. Anyone can be gentle when life is easy. The true measure of a person is how they treat others when they are in pain. Stoic preparation keeps this standard alive, even in darkness. So the sixth movement of this philosophy is about connection. You grieve, but you do not disappear. You hurt, but you do not harden. You stay human among humans. And in doing so, you ensure that loss does not turn into loneliness. Pain does not turn into coldness. As the Stoic journey continues, loss begins to reveal something unexpected. It strips away illusion and leaves only what is essential. Marcus Aurelius understood that suffering has a clarifying power. It shows you what truly matters and what was never as important as you believed. Preparing for loss means preparing to receive this clarity without becoming cynical or bitter. When loss arrives, many people become disillusioned with life itself. They conclude that love is pointless, effort is wasted, and meaning is fragile. Marcus resists this conclusion. He reminds himself that impermanence does not cancel value. A short life is not a worthless life. A temporary love is not a false love. Meaning is found in how something is lived, not in how long it lasts. Seneca deepens this idea by warning against turning disappointment into a worldview. He says that pain tempts the mind to generalize. One loss becomes proof that nothing is safe. One ending becomes evidence that everything will end badly. This is how grief hardens into pessimism. Stoic preparation teaches you to keep your judgments precise. This happened. It hurt. It does not mean all of life is cruel. There is a quiet maturity that comes from this discipline. You allow loss to refine your priorities instead of poisoning them. You stop chasing what does not matter. You invest more deeply in what does. Marcus often reflects on how quickly fame, wealth, and status disappear. Loss confirms this truth. But instead of becoming detached, he becomes more committed to virtue, honesty, and presence. This is why Stoicism does not collapse into nihilism. Marcus believes that meaning comes from acting in accordance with nature, not from controlling outcomes. When something ends, the question is not why did this happen, but how will I respond? Your response becomes your purpose. Loss gives why. An opportunity to live your values more clearly than comfort ever could. Seneca also speaks about gratitude after loss, not as forced positivity, but as recognition. He says we should be thankful not that something ended, but that it existed at all. This gratitude is not loud. It is quiet and steady. It does not erase pain. It balances it. Without gratitude, grief turns heavy and dark. With gratitude, grief becomes tender. Marcus Aurelius writes that the obstacle becomes the way. Loss becomes a teacher. It teaches patience, humility, and compassion. It teaches you how to sit with discomfort without fleeing into distraction or denial. This teaching is available to everyone, but only those who prepare can receive it without resentment. Another subtle danger appears here. Some people use loss as an excuse to abandon joy. They believe happiness would dishonor what was lost. Seneca rejects this idea completely. He argues that joy and grief are not enemies. You can carry both. Laughter does not erase memory. Living fully does not betray love. Stoic preparation allows joy to return without guilt. You do not rush it. You do not force it. You simply allow life to breathe again. Marcus understood that to refuse joy permanently is to misunderstand existence itself. Life is movement. To freeze yourself in sorrow is to resist nature. So this stage of preparation is about meaning. Loss takes away what is not essential and leaves you face to face with yourself. You can either grow colder and narrower or deeper and wiser. The Stoic chooses depth. He allows loss to sharpen his sense of what matters without letting it destroy his trust in life. And in this choice, the heart remains open, even after it has been wounded. As time passes after loss, another challenge quietly appears: memory. Marcus Aurelius understood that memory can either soften the heart or imprison it. Prepari. For loss means preparing for how you will remember, not just how you will suffer. The way you hold memory determines whether the past becomes a source of strength or a weight that never loosens. Many people cling to memory with desperation. They replay moments endlessly, as if repetition could reverse reality. Seneca warns that this habit turns remembrance into torture. The Stoic does not erase memory, but he changes his relationship with it. He allows memories to visit without letting them rule. He remembers with gratitude rather than demand. Marcus often reflects on how quickly all things pass, even the memory of great suffering. This is not meant to belittle pain. It is meant to free the mind from the fear that grief will last forever. When you understand that emotional states change just as seasons do, you stop panicking when sadness returns. You greet it, you endure it, and you let it move on. There is an important Stoic distinction here. Remembering is not the same as reliving. Reliving drags the mind back into pain as if it were happening now. Remembering observes the past from the present with awareness. Stoic practice trains this awareness. When a memory arises, you notice it, acknowledge it, and return to the moment you are in. This keeps the heart open without reopening the wound endlessly. Seneca speaks beautifully about this balance. He says that tears are acceptable, but dwelling is dangerous. Grief should be like a visitor, not a permanent resident. You welcome it when it arrives, but you do not give it the keys to your life. This discipline does not make you cold, it makes you free. Marcus also reminds himself that the people we lose are not truly gone from our lives as influences. What they gave us remains. Their words, their values, their love continue to shape who we are. When memory is approached this way, it becomes a source of warmth, wrath, than pain. You do not cling to what cannot return. You carry forward what was given. Another danger arises when memory becomes idealized. The past is polished until it seems perfect, making the present feel empty by comparison. Seneca warns against this illusion. He says we should remember truthfully, not romantically. This honesty prevents resentment toward the present and keeps life from feeling permanently diminished. Stoic preparation teaches you to let memory serve life, not replace it. You remember while continuing to live. You honor the past without sacrificing the present. Marcus Aurelius believed that to stop living fully because of memory is to misunderstand both life and loss. This approach also protects you from becoming emotionally closed. When memory is handled wisely, it deepens compassion. You understand suffering because you have known it. You become more patient with others because you have felt pain yourself. Loss, processed through memory, becomes a bridge to empathy rather than a wall of isolation. So this stage of preparation is about remembrance with balance. You do not forget. You do not obsess. You allow memory to exist in its proper place. And when you do this, loss does not turn your heart into stone. It turns it into something quieter, softer, and more understanding, capable of holding both what was and what still is. As the Stoic path unfolds further, attention turns to the future, not with fear, but with sober openness. Marcus Aurelius understood that after loss, the mind often becomes suspicious of what is yet to come. You begin to expect disappointment. You brace yourself against hope. Preparing for loss means preparing not to close yourself to the future simply because the past has hurt you. Marcus reminds himself that the future has not wronged him yet. Only imagination has. This insight is crucial. Loss teaches the mind to anticipate pain everywhere, even where it has not arrived. The Stoic response is not blind optimism, but fairness. You do not condemn tomorrow for what yesterday took away. You meet the future as it is, not as your fear predicts it will be. Seneca speaks strongly about this tendency. He says that after suffering, people often punish themselves twice, first through the loss itself, and second by refusing future joy. They live defensively, half alive, believing this restraint is wisdom. Seneca calls this a mistake. He argues that closing yourself to life is not preparation, it is surrender. Stoic preparation restores trust without naivety. You know loss can happen again. You accept that risk. But you also know that refusing to live fully is a greater loss than any fate could impose. Marcus believes that courage is not the absence of vulnerability, but the willingness to act rightly despite it. This changes how you love again. You do not rush. You do not cling. You do not armor yourself completely. You enter relationships with awareness rather than fear. Love becomes a conscious choice instead of an unconscious dependency. Coldness protects itself. Stoic wisdom offers itself freely, knowing the cost and accepting it. Marcus Aurelius writes that what stands in the way becomes the way. Loss becomes part of your equipment for living. It teaches restraint, depth, and humility. These qualities do not weaken future joy. They refine it. Joy becomes quieter, but stronger, less frantic, more real. Seneca adds that a wise person is not one who avoids attachment, but one who can let go without losing himself. This balance allows you to build again without forgetting. You carry lessons forward, not wounds. You remember pain, but you are not governed by it. There is also a sense of moral responsibility here. Marcus believed that each person has a role to play in the larger order of life. Loss does not remove you from this role. If anything, it makes your contribution more meaningful. Having suffered, you understand others more deeply. You become capable of compassion that comfort alone could never teach. The future, then, is not something to fear after loss. It is something to approach with seriousness and courage. You will love again. You will risk again, not because you are careless, but because you are alive. Stoic preparation ensures that when loss happens again, as it likely will, it finds a soul that is open but not fragile. This is how the Stoic prepares for what comes next. He does not harden himself against life. He steadies himself within it. He accepts uncertainty as the price of meaning. And in doing so, he remains human, capable of love, hope, and dignity, even in a world that never promises permanence. As the Stoic reflection reaches deeper ground, it turns toward the most difficult realization of all. Loss is not something that happens only at the end of life or at rare tragic moments. Loss is happening all the time. Marcus Aurelius understood this with painful clarity. Every day something is leaving us, a version of ourselves, a moment that will never return, a relationship that subtly changes. Preparing for loss, then, is not a special exercise reserved for catastrophe. It is a way of living attentively within constant change. Marcus writes to himself that you are always losing something, even as you gain something else. Youth fades, strength declines, certainty dissolves. This truth is unsettling, but it is also freeing. When you accept that loss is continuous, you stop treating it as an exception. And when loss is no longer an exception, it loses its power to shock you into bitterness. Most people resist this idea because it threatens their sense of stability. They want to believe there will be a moment when things lie settle, when nothing important will change again. Seneca calls this belief a dangerous illusion. Life does not move toward permanence. It moves through transformation. Those who accept this remain flexible. Those who resist it become rigid and resentful. Here is where Stoic preparation becomes almost invisible. You begin to practice letting go in small ways. You let go of minor expectations. You release the need to control outcomes. You accept inconvenience without rage. These daily acts of surrender train the soul. When larger losses arrive, the soul is not encountering letting go for the first time. It has been rehearsing all along. Marcus Aurelius believed that the mind should be trained the same way the body is trained, gradually, consistently, with patience. You do not wait for a crisis to build strength. You build it quietly so that when crisis comes, it finds you ready. This readiness is not hardness. It is familiarity with change. Seneca adds that people are not destroyed by loss itself, but by the belief that loss should not have happened. This belief is deeply emotional, not logical. It feels personal, as if the universe made a mistake. Stoic preparation gently removes this belief long before loss arrives. You learn to see events as part of a larger order, not as personal attacks. This does not make grief disappear, but it changes its texture. Grief becomes sorrowful acceptance rather than violent protest. You mourn what has ended without demanding that reality reverse itself. This is why Stoic grief, though painful, does not rot into anger. Another critical insight emerges here. Marcus Aurelius understood that preparing for loss also means preparing for your own death. Not morbidly, honestly. When you truly accept that you will one day disappear, something strange happens. You stop demanding immortality from people, relationships, and moments. You stop asking them to fill the role of eternity. This reduces pressure. Love becomes lighter, freer, more humane. Seneca often reminds his readers that we are guests at a banquet of life. We arrive without knowing when we will be asked to leave. A wise guest enjoys the meal without clutching the table in panic when the host calls time. This metaphor captures the Stoic attitude perfectly. Gratitude without possession, presence without illusion. When you live this way, coldness has no soil to grow in. Coldness comes from disappointment turned inward, from hopes crushed by unrealistic expectations. Stoicism does not kill hope, it purifies it. Hope becomes aligned with what is possible rather than what is guaranteed. Marcus Aurelius repeatedly tells himself to love fate, not in a passive sense, but in a cooperative one. Whatever happens is part of the same nature that produced you. Resisting it endlessly is exhausting. Accepting it intelligently is liberating. This acceptance does not cancel emotion. It gives emotion a place to rest. Loss also teaches humility. It reminds you that you are not the center of existence. Things do not exist solely to please or comfort you. This humility softens the ego. And when the ego softens, suffering loses its sharpest edge. Many people become cold because loss humiliates them. Stoicism teaches you to accept humility before loss arrives, so it does not feel like an insult when it comes. Seneca warns that pride makes grief heavier. The more exceptional you believe your life should be, the more unbearable loss becomes. The Stoic cures this by remembering that suffering is universal. You are not singled out. You are participating in the human condition. This realization does not diminish your pain. It connects it to something larger, making it easier to bear. There is also a quiet, ethical transformation that happens when you accept cons. Tant loss. You become less cruel in your judgments. You understand that everyone is fighting impermanence in their own way. People lash out, cling, withdraw, or numb themselves because they are afraid of losing what they cannot keep. This understanding breeds compassion. Marcus Aurelius believed that compassion is not weakness, it is alignment with reality. To be human is to be vulnerable. To pretend otherwise is to lie to yourself. Stoic preparation removes this lie gently, replacing it with clarity. As loss becomes familiar, something unexpected happens. You become more courageous, not less. When you know that nothing is guaranteed, you stop waiting for perfect conditions. You speak truth sooner. You pursue meaning now. You stop postponing life. This urgency is not frantic. It is focused. Seneca criticizes those who delay living, who tell themselves they will be brave, kind, or honest later. Loss exposes the danger of this thinking. Later is never promised. The Stoic lives as if time is precious because it is. This makes life fuller, not heavier. Another subtle shift occurs in how you experience attachment. You still form bonds. You still care deeply. But your care is no longer desperate. You do not cling as if holding tighter will prevent loss. You understand that clinging does not protect. It only exhausts. Letting go internally while remaining present externally is one of the highest Stoic skills. Marcus Aurelius practiced this by constantly reminding himself that what he loves is temporary, but his capacity to love is renewable. Even after loss, the heart can open again. Coldness says, once hurt, never again. Stoicism says, hurt is the price of love, not a reason to abandon it. Loss also strips away trivial concerns. Things that once felt urgent lose their grip. Petty conflicts seem absurd. Marcus often reflects on how small most human worries are when seen against time and death. Loss sharpens this perspective instantly. The Stoic uses it as a compass, not a curse. This perspective also protects against envy. When you understand that everyone will lose everything eventually, comparison loses meaning. You stop measuring your life against others. You focus instead on how well you live the life you have been given. This inward focus stabilizes the soul. Seneca emphasizes that a wise person does not ask for a life without loss, but for a character capable of meeting loss. This is the heart of Stoic preparation. You cannot control what stays. You can control who you are when things leave. Over time, this approach reshapes grief itself. Grief becomes quieter, less dramatic, more contemplative. It still hurts, but it does not shout. It does not demand. It does not accuse. It simply acknowledges what has changed. Marcus Aurelius often ends his reflections by returning to simplicity. Eat, sleep, do your work, treat others well. Loss does not exempt you from these things, it grounds you in them. Simple acts become anchors when everything else feels uncertain. In this sense, preparing for loss is preparing to live simply and honestly, without illusion, without entitlement, without self-pity. This simplicity is not bleak, it is clean. It leaves room for warmth because nothing unnecessary is cluttering the heart. So by the time the Stoic reaches this stage, loss no longer feels like an enemy. It feels like a stern teacher. It teaches humility, urgency, compassion, and courage. It removes what is false and leaves what is real. And this is why Stoic preparation does not produce cold people. It produces clear people, people who know that everything passes and therefore choose to live, love and act with intention while it is still possible. As we arrive at the final stage of this Stoic journey, it becomes clear that preparing for our loss is not a singular exercise or a distant meditation, but a continuous practice that transforms the way we inhabit life itself. Marcus Aurelius writes, as if speaking across time to himself, "That which you love will change, that which you cherish may vanish, and that the one thing within your control is the way you meet these realities." This stage is the culmination of all the earlier reflections: acceptance of impermanence, training of the mind, cultivation of presence, and harmonization of grief with virtue, blending them into a coherent way of being that does not harden the heart, but deepens it. Loss is inevitable, yet it does not have to be destructive. Marcus understood that suffering is part of the natural order, part of a universe that moves according to its own laws. He reminds himself repeatedly that the universe owes him nothing, yet it provides him with everything necessary to act rightly. Preparing for loss, then, is preparing to live in alignment with the flow of life, understanding that events are neither hostile nor unfair, but simply what occurs when nature follows its course. Seneca echoes this sentiment with piercing clarity. He writes that the soul is not measured by the comfort it receives, but by the integrity with which it carries adversity. Those who prepare for loss cultivate a mind that can receive suffering without resistance, allowing grief to be experienced fully yet without distortion. This balance is delicate. Grief is not to be denied or minimized. It is to be observed, understood, and integrated into the fabric of the self. When practiced consistently, it ceases to be an overwhelming force and becomes a teacher, instructing the soul in patience, humility, and clarity. One of the most profound insights in this stage is the understanding that love and loss are inseparable. Marcus Aurelius writes that to love is to be vulnerable, and vulnerability is the price of meaningful connection. The Stoic does not recoil from this truth. Instead, he embraces it with awareness. Love deeply, yes, but love wisely, understanding that impermanence is intrinsic to all human experience. This perspective allows the heart to remain open, even as it encounters inevitable sorrow. Coldness emerges from avoidance, from the refusal to engage fully because of fear. The Stoic, conversely, cultivates courage, the courage to enter life fully, knowing the fragility of all things. This stage also emphasizes the cultivation of emotional sovereignty. The Stoic prepares to meet loss without surrendering to it entirely, maintaining a sense of inner stability even while allowing natural emotional responses to arise. Marcus frequently reminds himself that external events, no matter how significant, cannot corrupt virtue unless it is willingly surrendered. Loss can wound, but it cannot define or destroy the person who has trained the mind and aligned it with reason. Here lies the profound freedom of Stoicism. While we cannot dictate the external world, we can govern our internal responses. Seneca complements this with practical guidance on moderation. He counsels against excessive mourning that becomes self-indulgent, reminding that sorrow must have limits and proportion. At the same time, he rejects the notion of emotional suppression. True Stoic preparation is not the erasure of feeling, but the cultivation of measured feeling, whereby grief is acknowledged, respected, and allowed to exist without consuming the entirety of life. In this way, emotional depth is preserved rather than sacrificed, and the soul remains fertile for connection, joy, and purpose. A crucial dimension of this stage is the recognition of impermanence in the context of time. Marcus reflects constantly on the fleeting nature of existence, observing that days pass, moments vanish, and opportunities slip away if unheeded. Preparing for loss is thus inseparable from preparing to live attentively. Every conversation, every act of kindness, every embrace carries weight precisely because it may not recur. By living as though each moment is precious, the Stoic transforms the inevitability of loss into a catalyst for meaningful engagement. Life is neither postponed nor wasted. Presence becomes a practice, cultivated through awareness and intentionality. Furthermore, the Stoic recognizes the interconnectedness of human experience. Loss is not a private calamity, it is part of the shared condition of life. Marcus often contemplates how the natural cycles of birth, growth, decline, and death are universal. This awareness fosters empathy. One who has prepared for loss understands that suffering is not unique to oneself. The wisdom gained from encountering loss equips the individual to act with compassion, patience, and generosity toward others, even in their own moments of grief. Coldness diminishes empathy, preparation enhances it. Seneca emphasizes the role of reflection in consolidating this preparation. Daily meditation on mortality and impermanence, what he calls memento mori, serves not to depress but to illuminate. By contemplating the inevitability of change and death, one cultivates appreciation for what exists now. The mind becomes disciplined in valuing presence over permanence, substance over illusion, and virtue over external circumstance. Loss, then, is contextualized as a natural teacher rather than a tyrant, instructing the soul in the art of living fully. Another aspect of this final stage involves integrating loss into a coherent worldview. Marcus repeatedly returns to the principle that events are neither good nor evil in themselves, only our judgments make them so. When loss occurs, the Stoic observes without unnecessary condemnation, recognizing it as part of the unfolding of nature. The emotional energy that might have been spent on resentment is redirected toward gratitude for what was experienced, reflection on personal growth, and readiness for the life that continues. Grief is transformed from a corrosive force into a catalyst for wisdom. In practical terms, this preparation manifests in a quiet resilience. The Stoic develops habits that anchor the mind, journaling to clarify thought, mindful observation to remain present, reflection on values to maintain purpose, and deliberate attention to acts of kindness to sustain relational bonds. These practices do not prevent loss but fortify the individual against being overwhelmed by it. They create a framework in which love, sorrow, and gratitude coexist without contradiction, each informing a life that is coherent, intentional, and morally grounded. Marcus also teaches that loss can illuminate what is truly within our control. Possessions, status, and even relationships are contingent. The one domain that remains largely inviolate is the cultivation of virtue, wisdom, courage, justice, and temperance. By centering life around these enduring qualities, the Stoic ensures that no matter how much is lost externally, the self retains integrity. Loss cannot touch what is internally grounded. This realization turns the inevitability of loss from a source of fear into a guide for focus, prioritization, and moral clarity. Seneca highlights the ethical dimension of response to loss. How one meets suffering reflects character. React with bitterness, avoidance, or cruelty, and you compound misfortune. Respond with measured grief, reflection, and action guided by virtue, and loss becomes a teacher rather than a tormentor. This underscores the Stoic principle that life's challenges are opportunities for moral development, and the cultivation of inner excellence is the ultimate safeguard against the corrosive potential of sorrow. By the final stage, Stoic preparation is holistic. It encompasses awareness of impermanence, training of the mind, cultivation of presence, measured engagement with grief, attentiveness to relationships, reflection on memory, readiness for the future, and the strengthening of virtue. These elements coalesce to produce a life that is resilient, compassionate, and fully human. The heart remains open, capable of loving, mourning, and rejoicing in due measure. Ultimately, Marcus Aurelius and Seneca reveal that preparing for loss without becoming cold is a practice of integration. It harmonizes the inevitabilities of life with a capacity for warmth, empathy, and moral clarity. Loss is no longer a threat that demands withdrawal, but a teacher that instructs in patience, courage, and depth. The Stoic meets grief with eyes open, heart engaged, and mind disciplined, understanding that the very fragility of life is what makes it precious. When this understanding is internalized, one moves through the world differently. Love is deeper, more conscious, and more appreciative. Relationships are honored rather than taken for granted. Joy is embraced without clinging. Pain is endured without bitterness. Each moment is inhabited fully because the impermanence of all things has been acknowledged and accepted. In this way, life itself becomes the practice of Stoic preparation, every encounter, every feeling, every thought an opportunity to live in accordance with reason and virtue, even amidst inevitable loss. In conclusion, the Stoic approach does not harden or numb the heart. It educates it. It shapes it into an instrument capable of both enduring sorrow and embracing love. Marcus Aurelius reminds that the world changes, people depart, and time moves relentlessly. Yet within this flux, the prepared mind and heart remain open, resilient, and clear. Loss does not steal warmth, it refines it. Sorrow does not produce bitterness, it cultivates depth. And in this delicate, disciplined equilibrium, the human being achieves a freedom and strength that is profoundly alive, fully aware, and capable of meeting life exactly as it is, impermanent, fragile, and utterly precious.